I'm not really the type to air my dirty laundry like this, but I need to get this off my chest. My name's Ethan, and I'm 32 years old. I thought I had my life figured out, but these last few months, well, they've completely torn me apart. I was married, or at least I thought I was, until everything came crashing down because of Madison, my wife. She's 5 years younger than me, and looking back, maybe that should have been a clue. I fell for her hard, and fast, blinded by her beauty, her energy, and yeah, I guess her wild side. I should have seen the warning signs from day one, but I didn't want to believe them. You see, when I first met Madison, I was completely smitten. I couldn't believe a woman like her would even give me the time of day. She had this way about her, like she was untouchable. Everyone in the room seemed to gravitate toward her, and she thrived on it. That's the thing about Madison, she always needed to be the center of attention. I guess that's what drew me in. She was this whirlwind of excitement, and I got swept up in it. I'll admit it now, I gave her way too much freedom. I wanted to be the cool husband, you know. The one who wasn't possessive or controlling. So, when she stayed out late with friends or spent entire weekends doing her own thing, I didn't question it. I let her live her life because I thought that's what trust meant. But in reality, I was just blind. Blind to the fact that she was living her life without me. At first, it was easy to make excuses for her behavior. She liked going to parties, sure, but so what? She was still young, and I figured she just needed time to adjust to married life. She wasn't used to stability or routine. But as the weeks turned into months, her behavior didn't change. In fact, it got worse. She stopped coming home some nights, and when she did, she was usually too drunk to even hold a conversation. I tried to talk to her about it once, but she brushed me off, saying I was overreacting. It's just who I am, she'd say, like that was supposed to make it all okay. I loved her, though. That was my problem. I loved her so damn much that I was willing to put up with anything just to keep her. Every time I tried to bring up how distant we were becoming, she'd flip the script and make me feel like I was the one being unreasonable. Ethan, you knew who I was when you married me, she'd say. And maybe she was right. I did know who she was. But what I didn't realize was that she'd never change, and I was just fooling myself thinking she would. The more I gave, the more she took. And the more I let her take, the more distant she became. It was like trying to hold on to smoke, it just kept slipping through my fingers. At the time, I didn't understand why. I thought maybe I wasn't doing enough to make her happy, so I started bending over backward, doing everything I could to please her. Expensive gifts, lavish trips, anything she wanted. But nothing seemed to satisfy her. It wasn't until much later that I realized Madison never cared about me, not really. She cared about the life I could give her, the freedom, the luxury. I was just a means to an end for her, and I was too blind to see it. Looking back now, it's almost laughable how naive I was. I thought I had it all, a beautiful wife, a great life, but the truth was, Madison had her own agenda from the start. She was never the sweet, devoted wife I thought she was. She was just waiting for the right moment to tear it all apart. After meeting Madison, it was like my entire world flipped upside down. I had never been so captivated by someone in my life. We met at one of my buddy's parties, and as soon as I saw her, I knew I had to talk to her. She stood out in the crowd, not just because she was beautiful, though she absolutely was, but because she carried herself like she was the only person in the room that mattered. And she liked it that way. The more attention she got, the more she seemed to thrive on it. There was something magnetic about her confidence, her carefree attitude, her need to be the center of everything. My friends knew her, some better than I did, I realize now. They tried to warn me, casually dropping hints about her wild reputation. She was known for bouncing from guy to guy, never staying in one place for too long. Ethan, she's trouble, they'd tell me. But I didn't want to listen. I didn't care about her past, I only cared about how she made me feel. She had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the world when she was with you, and I fell for it. Hard. We started dating, and to me, it was perfect. I ignored the late-night parties, the fact that she'd go days without texting back sometimes. I chalked it up to her free spirit. I was convinced that once we got more serious, she'd settle down. I figured she just needed someone to love her enough to show her that life didn't have to be all chaos and noise. I took her on expensive trips, dinners at the best restaurants, anything to show her that I could give her the kind of life she deserved. And she ate it up. But even then, there was this part of her that stayed just out of reach, like she never let me in all the way. She was always chasing something more, something else, and I was too blind to see that it was never going to be me. After 6 months, I was convinced that I'd found the woman I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. She was everything I thought I wanted, beautiful, confident, independent. So, I did what any love-struck fool would do, I proposed. It wasn't a small gesture either. I planned this whole elaborate getaway to a private island, just the two of us. I pulled out all the stops, hired a private chef, bought the most ridiculous ring I could afford, and waited for the perfect moment to pop the question. We were sitting on the beach, watching the sunset, a bottle of champagne between us. It felt like a scene out of a movie. I asked her to marry me, and she said yes. But now, thinking back on it, there was something in the way she said it that didn't sit right. She cried, sure, but it wasn't the kind of cry you'd expect from someone overwhelmed with happiness. It was like she was relieved, like she had secured her place. I didn't see it then, I was too wrapped up in the moment, but now it's clear as day. She wasn't saying yes to me, she was saying yes to the life I was offering her. From that moment on, everything moved fast. We had this huge, extravagant wedding. It was in all the papers, on every social media feed you could think of. People couldn't stop talking about how perfect we were together, like we were some kind of power couple. But behind the scenes, it wasn't like that at all. Even during the wedding, I could feel this growing distance between us, like she was there for the spectacle, not for me. It's embarrassing to admit now, but I ignored it. I convinced myself that once the wedding chaos was over, everything would settle down, and we'd finally be able to just be together. But I was wrong. So wrong. Once the honeymoon glow faded, reality hit me like a ton of bricks. It wasn't that I expected marriage to be some perfect fairy tale, but I sure as hell didn't expect the wall that started building between Madison and me. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just the natural adjustment to married life. After all, we didn't know each other that well before we tied the knot. But the truth was, she wasn't just distant, she was checked out. I'd come home from work, hoping to talk about our day, maybe have dinner together, but Madison always had other plans. If she wasn't out with her friends, she was holed up in her separate room, doing God knows what. Yeah, we had agreed to keep our own spaces, but I didn't expect her to live like we were still dating casually. It felt like we were just two people sharing a house, not a life. I'd ask her to join me for dinner, and she'd shrug it off, saying she already had plans. Don't wait up, she'd toss over her shoulder, like I was some sort of afterthought. The nights when she came home at all, she'd stumble in drunk, barely acknowledging me before collapsing into bed. At first, I tried to be understanding. She's adjusting, I'd tell myself. She'll settle down once she gets used to this new life. But weeks turned into months, and nothing changed. If anything, she got worse. She'd come home smelling like booze, sometimes perfume that wasn't hers, and there was always this smug smile on her face like she was getting away with something. I started to dread those nights, the ones where she would crawl into bed beside me, her back turned like I wasn't even there. I tried to talk to her about it, about how it felt like she was slipping away from me. I asked if something was wrong, if there was anything I could do to help her adjust. She just laughed it off, waving her hand dismissively like I was making a big deal out of nothing. Ethan, this is who I am. You knew that when you married me, she'd say. And honestly, maybe she was right. I did know she liked to party, to live life on her own terms. But I thought marriage meant something would change. I thought it meant we were partners now, that we were in this together. The worst part was that whenever I tried to get closer, it felt like she pulled further away. I'd planned these special nights for just the two of us, dinners, little weekend getaways, but she never seemed interested. She'd always have an excuse ready, something about being too tired or having already made plans. I was bending over backwards to keep us connected, but no matter what I did, she just wasn't there. One night, after another one of her disappearing acts, I finally had enough. I sat her down and told her we needed to talk. I asked her, point blank, why she was so distant. Is there something I'm missing here? Do you even want to be married to me? I said, hoping for some kind of real answer. But all I got was the same dismissive attitude. She looked at me like I was being overly dramatic. Ethan, you're making this way more complicated than it needs to be. I'm just adjusting. Give me time. Adjusting. That was her favorite word, but I wasn't sure what she was adjusting to anymore. We'd been married for months now, and if anything, it felt like she was getting more comfortable with the distance between us. I started to wonder if this was all part of her plan, keep me at arm's length, live her life the way she wanted, and still have me footing the bill for it. I didn't want to believe it, but every time I tried to get close, she'd throw up another barrier. I started noticing little things that didn't add up. She'd get these texts late at night and quickly turn her phone screen off when I was around. She stopped wearing her wedding ring when she went out, saying it was too flashy, or that it didn't match her outfit. I remember seeing her once at a bar with some of her friends, laughing, acting like she didn't have a care in the world. When I walked over to say hi, her smile faded for just a second, like I wasn't supposed to be there. Like I was intruding on her fun. That's when it hit me. Maybe she didn't want to adjust. Maybe she didn't want this marriage at all, at least not in the way I did. She liked the idea of being my wife, the lifestyle it gave her, but the actual commitment? The loyalty? That wasn't her style. I started to feel like a fool, and I hated myself for it. Here I was, doing everything I could to be a good husband, and she was living her life like she was still single, barely acknowledging the fact that we were supposed to be a team. But the worst part? I still loved her. I still wanted to make it work, even though I could feel her slipping away. I kept telling myself that maybe if I just gave her more space, maybe if I just kept trying, she'd come around. But the more I tried, the further away she got, and I started to wonder if she'd ever been close to me in the first place. I'll never forget the day everything really started to fall apart. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I came home early from work to grab some documents for an upcoming meeting. I wasn't planning on staying long, just in and out. Madison wasn't home, big surprise there, so the house was dead quiet. She'd probably gone off with her friends again, doing whatever it was she did when she wasn't pretending to be my wife. As I walked past her room, something nagged at me. Maybe it was intuition or just plain curiosity, but for the first time since we got married, I felt like I needed to know what went on behind that closed door. We kept separate rooms, something Madison had insisted on, for space, and I'd respected her boundaries. But lately, those boundaries had started to feel more like walls, ones she used to shut me out of her life. So, I made a decision that I hadn't dared to before. I opened her door and stepped inside. Her room was neat, too neat for someone who lived so chaotically. There wasn't a thing out of place, her makeup perfectly lined up on the vanity, clothes hung up like a showroom, bed made without a wrinkle. I started looking around, not even sure what I was hoping to find, maybe something that would give me a clue as to why she was acting the way she was. As I shuffled through some papers on her desk, I knocked over one of her lipsticks. It rolled across the floor, and when I bent down to pick it up, I noticed something sticking out from under the dresser. It was just the corner of a piece of paper, but for some reason, it caught my eye. I reached under and pulled it out, expecting it to be nothing important. But the moment I unfolded it, my heart dropped. It was an invitation. And not just any invitation, it was to a private party. I looked closer, and my stomach turned when I saw that the party was in her honor, thrown by a group of men I didn't recognize. But it wasn't just the party itself that shook me, it was the way it was written. Right at the bottom, in bold letters, it said, "To the most beautiful woman in the world who deserves the love of every man." Every man. I read it again, hoping maybe I was misunderstanding, that it was some kind of joke. But no. It was right there in black and white. An invitation, specifically for my wife, to attend a party thrown by men who clearly weren't just looking to throw a friendly gathering. For a second, I stood there, completely numb. It was like my mind couldn't process what I was seeing. Was this what she had been doing? Partying with men behind my back while I sat at home, worrying about her. How long had this been going on? The more I thought about it, the more the pieces started to fit together, the late nights, the disappearing acts, the excuses that never made sense. I felt sick. I had trusted her, given her everything she wanted, and this was how she repaid me. With deceit. I turned the invitation over in my hands, searching for more details. The address for the party was listed on the back, a private villa, of course. And as I read the name of the villa's owner, my blood ran cold. It wasn't just any place. It belonged to one of my business competitors, Jason Turner, a guy I had crossed paths with more times than I cared to admit. We were friendly on the surface, but everyone knew there was bad blood between us. And now, my wife was attending his private parties. I stood there, staring at the invitation, my heart pounding in my chest. The anger started to rise up, hotter and hotter. Was Madison sleeping with him? With them? Was this why she'd been so distant, so detached? I felt like a fool, like the world's biggest idiot for not seeing this sooner. I should have known. She always had a taste for attention, always wanted more than what I could give her. And now, she was getting it from someone else, or rather, several someone else's. I knew I had to find out for myself. I couldn't just sit there and stew in my own anger without knowing the truth. I grabbed my phone and dialed Madison's number, trying to keep my voice calm as I asked her where she was. She answered on the second ring, her voice as sweet and casual as ever. "I'm just at a friend's house for a little sleepover. I'll be home tomorrow," she said, her words dripping with innocence. But I knew better now. That lie slipped off her tongue so easily, it made me sick to my stomach. I clenched my jaw, barely holding back the rage as I told her to have fun and hung up the phone. I wasn't buying any of it. I knew where she really was, or at least where she was going to be. I grabbed my keys and headed straight for the address on the invitation. If she thought she could keep lying to me, she was in for a rude awakening. On the drive over, my mind raced. I kept picturing her with him, with them, laughing behind my back while they mocked me. I could feel the betrayal settling deep in my chest, burning like acid. How could she do this to me? After everything I'd done for her. The anger twisted inside me, but there was a sick sense of determination, too. I needed to see it with my own eyes. I needed to know for sure. When I arrived at the villa, the sight of all the cars lined up outside only confirmed my worst suspicions. I parked down the street, far enough to keep my presence unnoticed, and made my way to the side of the building. The music was loud, pounding through the walls, and as I crept toward one of the windows, I heard laughter, deep, male laughter. And then, as I peered through the glass, I saw it. Her car. Madison's car, parked right outside the front. I already knew the answer before I even saw her. But still, part of me hoped that maybe, just maybe, I was wrong. That maybe this was all some huge misunderstanding. But then I saw her. And every last hope I had left crumbled. I crept along the side of the villa, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath shallow and quick. The music was deafening, thumping through the walls, but it wasn't the sound that made my skin crawl, it was the laughter. Deep, booming male voices, mixed with occasional high-pitched giggles that sent a shiver down my spine. I knew that laugh. I'd heard it 1,000 times before. It was Madison's. I wasn't ready for what I was about to see, but something inside me pushed me forward, like I had to rip the band-aid off and face the truth head-on. I found a window with the blinds half-drawn, enough for me to peek inside without being seen. My hands were shaking as I lifted myself up to look through the glass, and what I saw, it was worse than anything I could have imagined. There she was. Madison. The woman I had promised my life to, standing right in the middle of a group of men, laughing, her hands on her hips like she was queen of the damn world. And these men, half of them barely dressed, some with their shirts off, a few just in their underwear, were circling her like vultures. One of them handed her a drink, and she downed it without a second thought, grinning like she was having the time of her life. I stood there, frozen, watching as she flirted with each of them like it was nothing. Like I didn't exist. The rage inside me boiled to the surface, and I wanted nothing more than to kick down the door and drag her out of there. But I couldn't move. My feet were glued to the ground, and all I could do was watch as my wife, paraded herself around like she was available to anyone who wanted her. And then, it got worse. One of the men, some guy I didn't recognize, stepped forward and pulled Madison into his arms. Without hesitation, she let him kiss her, right there in front of everyone. Her hands gripped his shoulders, pulling him closer, while the others hooted and hollered like it was some kind of show. My stomach churned, my fists clenched so tight I thought my knuckles would split open. I could barely breathe. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. But it was. And it got even worse. As the kiss ended, Madison pulled back, threw her head back, and laughed, a wild, carefree laugh that sent chills down my spine. The men cheered, raising their glasses to her like she was some sort of prize, and she basked in their attention, loving every second of it. I stood there, my heart breaking into pieces as I watched her enjoy herself with these men, flaunting herself like she had no shame. Like I didn't matter. I didn't even recognize her anymore. This wasn't the woman I fell in love with, the woman I thought I knew. This was someone else, someone I didn't even want to know. The worst part? She didn't look guilty. She didn't look conflicted or hesitant. No, she looked completely at ease. Like this was exactly where she wanted to be. Just as I thought I'd seen enough, something shifted. The men started chanting, their voices growing louder. Madison smiled, the kind of smile that twisted my gut into knots, and with one swift motion, she grabbed the hem of her dress and pulled it off. In an instant, she was standing there in nothing but a bra and panties, completely shameless, as the men circled around her, cheering her on. I could feel the heat rising in my face, my vision blurring with pure, white-hot rage. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was humiliation. She was parading herself around like a prize for these men, my competitors, no less, and enjoying every second of it. The way they looked at her, the way they touched her, it was more than I could take. My hands were trembling, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. I had to see. I had to witness the full extent of her betrayal. The room felt like it was spinning. I was standing there, helpless, watching as the woman I had married made a mockery of our vows, of everything we had built. And for what? For attention. For thrills. For men who didn't give a damn about her beyond what she could offer them for one night. One of the men grabbed her by the waist, pulling her onto his lap while the others shouted and cheered. She didn't resist. She leaned into him, her arms draped around his neck like she belonged to him, and not once did she look guilty. Not once did she act like she was doing something wrong. I could feel the blood pulsing in my temples, the anger coursing through my veins. How could she do this to me? To us? I don't know how long I stood there, watching, feeling like I was being crushed under the weight of her betrayal. It felt like hours, but it was probably only minutes. I wanted to storm in there, drag her out, and make her explain herself. But what good would it do? What could she possibly say to justify this? There were no words. Nothing she could say would erase what I'd seen. Nothing would change the fact that she had crossed a line, and there was no coming back from it. Eventually, I stepped back from the window, my body numb, my mind racing. I had seen enough. I didn't need to stay and watch any more of her debauchery. I already knew the truth, and it was more than I could handle. Madison had made her choice, and it wasn't me. I turned and walked back to my car, each step heavier than the last. My heart was pounding, my hands shaking, but my mind was clear. There was no coming back from this. She had thrown away everything we had, everything I had given her, for a night of drunken attention from men who didn't care about her. As I got into the car, I took one last look at the villa, the place where everything had fallen apart. I had trusted her. I had loved her. And she had betrayed me in the worst way possible. But she wasn't going to get away with it. Not this time. Not after what I had seen. The drive back from the villa was a blur. I don't even remember how I made it home, but by the time I got there, something inside me had changed. The shock was gone, replaced by something colder, darker. As I sat in the driveway, staring at the front door of the house that Madison and I were supposed to call home, I knew I couldn't let this go. She had crossed a line, one that couldn't be uncrossed. And now, it was my turn. I'd been blind for too long, letting her play me for a fool. I gave her everything, a life most people only dream of, and she threw it all away like it was nothing. But what she didn't realize was that I wasn't going to be her victim anymore. She thought she could get away with this, that she could make me the laughingstock while she paraded around with other men. She was wrong. The moment I stepped into the house, my mind was already racing, working through every possible scenario. Madison wasn't home yet, which gave me time. Time to plan. Time to think. Time to figure out exactly how I was going to make her pay. This wasn't going to be some emotional outburst, some petty argument where I'd scream and she'd cry and then we'd pretend like nothing happened. No, this was going to be calculated. Precise. I wasn't just going to get back at Madison, I was going to destroy her. And I wasn't stopping with her. Those men, the ones who laughed and cheered while she made a fool of me, they were going to regret ever touching her. Jason Turner, especially. He'd been waiting for a chance to take me down, and now he thought he'd found it by using my wife. But he didn't know me. He didn't know that I wasn't the kind of man you could humiliate and walk away from. I was going to tear down everything he had built, brick by brick. The first thing I did was sit down at my desk and start making a list. Every name, every detail. There were 6 men at that party, all of them connected to me in some way, business rivals, acquaintances, people who thought they could get one over on me. I wasn't just going to confront them. I was going to ruin them. My mind kept replaying what I had seen in that villa, Madison laughing, drinking, letting those men touch her like she was theirs. And the more I thought about it, the more the rage festered. She hadn't just betrayed me, she'd humiliated me. She turned our marriage into a joke, something for others to laugh about behind my back. But I wasn't going to let them have the last laugh. No, I was going to flip the script. I started with the men. I knew that if I wanted to take them down, I had to be smart about it. Direct confrontation wouldn't work, these weren't the kind of guys who would back down from a fight. But they all had something to lose. Careers. Reputations. Families. And I was going to take it all from them, one by one. I spent the next few days digging into their lives. Jason Turner was the easiest to target. He had a fiancée, a woman who had no idea what he was up to when she wasn't around. I found her contact information through some mutual acquaintances and sent her an anonymous message, hinting at what her beloved Jason was doing when she wasn't looking. She was bound to start asking questions. And when she did, I'd make sure she found the answers. For the others, I hired a private investigator. Someone discreet, someone who could dig up the dirt I needed without drawing attention. I wanted every detail: who they were seeing, where they spent their time, what skeletons they had hiding in their closets. And once I had enough, I'd make sure it all came out in the open. But Madison? Her betrayal needed something different. Something personal. I wasn't just going to end our marriage, I was going to dismantle her entire world. She had been living off me, using me to fund her lifestyle, to play the part of the perfect wife while sneaking around behind my back. That was over. I was going to take away everything she thought she had, starting with her reputation. The first step was making sure she didn't suspect a thing. I had to act like nothing had changed, like I hadn't seen her at the villa, like I didn't know about the men. When she came home the next morning, hungover and still reeking of alcohol, I played it cool. I asked her how her sleepover was, and she smiled that fake smile of hers, telling me it was great. She had no idea I knew the truth. But she was about to find out. I decided to bide my time, make her think everything was normal. In the meantime, I started making moves. I transferred assets out of our joint accounts, slowly draining the money she thought was hers. I cut off her access to my credit cards, telling her there had been a fraud alert that needed sorting out. She barely noticed at first, she was too busy living her double life. But soon, she'd realize the safety net she had been depending on was gone. Then, I hired a new, personal assistant, Brooke. She was smart, efficient, and, most importantly, beautiful. I made sure Madison noticed how much attention I gave her. I knew it would eat at her, the idea that I might be interested in someone else. I wanted her to squirm, to start doubting herself. Madison wasn't used to being on the back burner, but that's exactly where I put her. Every time I glanced at Brooke, every time I praised her for her work, I could see the jealousy flicker in Madison's eyes. Good. Let her wonder. Let her feel what I had felt. As the days passed, I played the role of the loving husband, all while setting the stage for her downfall. I watched her carefully, waiting for the right moment to pull the rug out from under her. She thought she had me fooled, but in reality, I was 5 steps ahead of her. And soon, she'd know exactly what that felt like. Introducing Brooke into the picture was one of the smartest moves I made. Madison had no idea she was about to be caught in her own web of lies. The idea came to me after I realized that playing the role of the clueless, loving husband wouldn't be enough. I needed to hit her where it hurt, her pride. And what better way to do that than by introducing another woman into the mix? Not just any woman either, but one who Madison couldn't dismiss or control. That's where Brooke came in. Brooke was young, mid-20s, and strikingly beautiful. She was sharp too, with a quick wit and a professional demeanor that immediately caught everyone's attention. But it wasn't just her looks that made her perfect for my plan. It was the fact that she was everything Madison wasn't: focused, loyal, and completely uninterested in the party scene that had consumed my wife. She was the kind of woman Madison would see as a threat without me even having to lift a finger. It was a typical evening when I first introduced them. Madison had been out with her friends again, and I knew she'd be stumbling in late, so I waited until just before she was due home to invite Brooke over. When Madison finally came in, her hair a mess, cheeks flushed from too many cocktails, she wasn't expecting to see anyone but me. The moment she laid eyes on Brooke, standing in the living room with me, you could see the confusion flash across her face. "Madison, this is Brooke," I said, putting on my best smile. "She's going to be working as my new personal secretary for the next few weeks." For a split second, Madison's mask slipped. I could see the hint of jealousy flicker in her eyes before she quickly regained her composure. She plastered on a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, that's nice," she muttered, glancing between the two of us. "I didn't know you were looking for a new assistant." I shrugged casually, making it seem like it wasn't a big deal. It was a last-minute decision. I needed someone to help me with this new project, and Brooke came highly recommended. Madison's gaze lingered on Brooke for a moment, sizing her up. I could almost hear the wheels turning in her head. She was trying to figure out what was going on, but I wasn't giving her anything. Brooke, on the other hand, played her part perfectly, polite, professional, and completely oblivious to the tension hanging in the air. For the next few days, I made sure Madison knew that Brooke was around. I invited her over frequently under the guise of discussing work, and every time Madison saw us together, her irritation grew. I could see it in the way she'd snap at me over the smallest things or how she'd make passive-aggressive comments about my new little secretary. She hated it, and that was the point. I started to act like Brooke was indispensable, praising her in front of Madison at every opportunity. Brooke's been a huge help, I'd say casually over dinner, watching as Madison stabbed at her food a little too forcefully. I don't know what I'd do without her. Madison's jealousy was bubbling just beneath the surface, and she tried to hide it, but I could see the cracks forming. The late-night parties became more frequent, her excuses flimsier. She was trying to assert her control, but it wasn't working. I had flipped the script, and now, she was the one feeling insecure, wondering what was really going on between Brooke and me. One night, I decided to take it a step further. Brooke was at the house again, helping me sort through some documents for an upcoming business trip. Madison had been in a bad mood all day, sulking in her room, probably nursing a hangover from another wild night. I knew she was already on edge, so I decided to push her a little more. As Brooke and I sat on the couch, going over the plans for the trip, I leaned in just a bit closer than necessary. I could feel Madison's eyes on us from the hallway. She had come downstairs, probably to grab a drink, but when she saw us sitting there, she froze. I didn't say anything to acknowledge her presence at first. Instead, I kept my focus on Brooke, resting my hand casually on the back of the couch, close enough to her that it looked intimate. "Do you think we'll be able to get everything done before the trip?" I asked Brooke, my voice deliberately soft. Brooke nodded, completely unaware of the silent war happening just a few feet away. "Absolutely. I've already handled the preliminary reports, so we're ahead of schedule." That's when Madison finally snapped. She stormed into the living room, her face a mix of anger and disbelief. "What the hell is going on here?" she demanded, her voice louder than it needed to be. I leaned back on the couch, acting surprised by her outburst. "Madison, relax. We're just going over work stuff." She glared at Brooke, who looked genuinely confused by the hostility. "Work stuff?" Madison repeated, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "It sure as hell doesn't look like work." I could feel the rage boiling inside her, and it took everything in me not to smirk. She was finally showing her true colors, the insecurity, the jealousy. I stood up slowly, walking over to her with a calm that only seemed to infuriate her more. "Madison, you're overreacting," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Brooke's just doing her job. If you have a problem with it, maybe you should take a look at why." Her eyes flashed with anger, and for a moment, I thought she might say something about her own infidelities, might blurt out a confession in her fury. But she didn't. Instead, she turned on her heel and stormed out of the room, muttering under her breath. I glanced at Brooke, who looked slightly bewildered by the whole scene. "Sorry about that," I said smoothly. "She's just stressed." Brooke gave a polite nod, still clearly unsure of what had just happened. "No worries," she said quietly, gathering her things. "I'll head out for the night." Once Brooke left, I waited for Madison to come back downstairs. I knew she was fuming, probably up in her room, trying to figure out what was really happening. I didn't care. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and that was all that mattered. She was the one who had betrayed me, but now, I was turning the tables, making her feel like she was losing her grip on me. And the best part? She had no idea that this was just the beginning. After setting the wheels in motion with Brooke, I knew the next step was to gather the kind of evidence that would truly break Madison's world apart. It wasn't enough for me to know she was cheating, I needed proof, and I needed to see it for myself. The rage inside me was no longer just anger, it had transformed into a kind of cold, calculated determination. I wasn't going to confront her until I had everything. So, I took the game a step further. I told Madison that I'd be leaving for a 2-week business trip and that Brooke would be accompanying me to handle the logistics. I could tell from the look on her face that she wasn't happy about it, but she didn't dare challenge me openly. She knew she couldn't accuse me of anything without opening the door to her own misdeeds, so she just played along, pretending like everything was fine. "Have a great time," she said with a forced smile as I packed my bags. "I'll just hang out with my friends while you're gone." I bet you will, I thought. Before I left, I hired a private investigator to follow her every move while I was away. I didn't trust her for a second, and I knew she wasn't going to sit quietly at home waiting for me to return. No, she'd use this time to do exactly what I expected, continue her affair. But this time, I would have eyes everywhere. As soon as I left for the airport with Brooke, I checked into a nearby hotel, far enough away from home but close enough to keep tabs on her. The private investigator I hired was discreet, skilled, and ready to report back every detail of Madison's activities. But I wasn't content to just let someone else do the dirty work. I wanted to see it with my own eyes. After all, I knew Madison better than anyone, her patterns, her habits, and the people she liked to surround herself with. The first day was uneventful. She went to lunch with one of her girlfriends, acted completely normal. It wasn't until the second day that things started to get interesting. My investigator sent me a message around noon, "She's heading to a hotel downtown." A hotel? Now that was suspicious. I decided to follow her myself that day, wanting to see who she was meeting without her knowing. I parked a few blocks away and waited, my pulse racing with anticipation. Sure enough, I watched as Madison's car pulled into the parking lot of a fancy hotel, one that wasn't exactly known for its restaurants. She stepped out, looking more put together than she had in weeks, like she was getting ready for a special occasion. She wasn't going to meet a friend for lunch, this was something else. I watched from a distance as she walked inside, her head held high, completely oblivious to the fact that I was watching. My hands tightened around the steering wheel, but I forced myself to stay calm. I wasn't ready to confront her, not yet. I needed to know who she was meeting. 15 minutes later, my question was answered. I saw him, Jason Turner, my business competitor and one of the men from that damned villa party. My blood boiled as I watched him casually stroll into the hotel lobby, like he didn't have a care in the world. He greeted Madison with a kiss on the cheek, and they laughed like old friends. Like nothing was wrong. I sat there, my heart pounding, fighting the urge to run inside and confront them both right then and there. But I didn't. I needed more than just a fleeting glance of them together. I needed concrete proof. They disappeared into the hotel for over 2 hours. I didn't need to know the details of what went on behind closed doors, but my imagination filled in the gaps all too easily. When they finally emerged, they looked relaxed. Too relaxed. Madison was smiling, her arm casually brushing against Jason's as they walked to their cars. They didn't even try to hide it. The audacity of it all made my stomach churn. I waited until they left before I called my investigator, instructing him to continue tailing Jason. I needed everything, his habits, his meetings, his connections. Not just for revenge, but because if I was going to take him down, I needed to know exactly where to hit. And as for Madison, I knew this wasn't the only man. I needed to see the full extent of her betrayal before I struck back. Over the next week, the investigator sent me daily updates. Madison was meeting with Jason regularly, and when she wasn't with him, she was out drinking with her so-called friends, most of whom knew exactly what was going on. There was no guilt, no hesitation in her actions. She was living a double life, plain and simple. During the day, she played the part of the loyal wife, but as soon as she thought I was out of town, she was back to her old tricks. On the fourth day, she met up with yet another man, this one a different face, but clearly part of her revolving door of affairs. They had lunch at a secluded restaurant on the outskirts of town, somewhere far enough away that she wouldn't be recognized. But she hadn't counted on me having someone watching her every move. By the time the second week rolled around, I had everything I needed. The investigator had gathered enough evidence to not only prove Madison's infidelity but also to damage Jason Turner's reputation. He wasn't just sleeping with my wife, he was making business deals behind the scenes that were less than legal. And now, I had proof of both. But I wasn't ready to strike just yet. I wanted to watch her squirm first. I needed her to know that I was always one step ahead of her, that her lies and deceit had caught up with her. So, I decided to stage a little welcome home surprise. On the day I was supposed to return from my business trip, I made sure everything was in place. Brooke had been briefed, and my investigator was standing by with the final report. All that was left was for Madison to walk into the trap. That evening, I came home earlier than expected, just to catch her off guard. I wanted to see the look on her face when I walked through the door with Brooke beside me. Sure enough, when Madison heard the door open, she rushed downstairs, her expression a mixture of relief and surprise. She clearly wasn't expecting me to show up so soon. "Back early?" she asked, her voice strained, eyes flicking nervously between me and Brooke. "Missed home," I replied coolly, watching her closely for any signs of guilt. "Figured we'd get things wrapped up quicker than expected." I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was wondering if I knew. If I had found out. But she kept her composure, playing the part of the dutiful wife. For now. I had everything in place. The lies, the deceit, it was all laid bare, and the time had come for Madison to face the consequences. My mind raced as I prepared for what would be the most satisfying moment of my life, the moment she realized that I knew everything. This wasn't just about catching her in the act anymore. It was about watching her world fall apart piece by piece, the way she had torn mine apart. The night of her downfall started like any other. She came home late, as usual, acting like she had just spent an innocent night out with her friends. But I knew better. I had been tracking her all week, watching as she slinked around town with Jason Turner and whatever other men she thought I didn't know about. But now it was time for her to see just how much I did know. I greeted her at the door with a smile, playing the part of the doting husband. "Hey, babe, how was your night?" I asked, masking the bitterness in my voice. She gave me that same rehearsed smile she always wore when she was lying. I could see through it now. "Oh, it was great," she said, her voice bubbly and casual, as if she hadn't just spent the night with another man. "We just had some drinks and caught up." I nodded, pretending to believe her, knowing full well what I was about to unleash. "Glad you had fun," I said, stepping aside so she could walk into the living room. "There's something I want to show you." She glanced at me, a flicker of confusion crossing her face, but she shrugged it off and followed me. I could tell she wasn't expecting anything, just another night of deceiving her clueless husband. Little did she know, her time was up. I led her into the living room, where I had everything set up. The lights were dimmed, and in the center of the room sat a large television screen, ready to play the footage that would bring her lies crashing down. I grabbed the remote and gestured for her to sit on the couch. "What's all this?" she asked, a hint of suspicion creeping into her voice. "Just something I've been working on," I replied coolly, keeping my tone light. "Thought you might want to see it." She sat down, her eyes darting between me and the screen. She still had no idea what was coming, no clue that I was about to reveal every dirty little secret she'd been hiding. I hit play. The screen flickered to life, and at first, it was just grainy footage of a hotel lobby. I could see her start to relax, like maybe she thought this was just some boring business presentation. But then, there she was. Madison. Walking into that same hotel lobby, arm in arm with Jason Turner, laughing, flirting, and completely oblivious to the fact that someone had been recording the entire thing. Her expression froze, her body tensing as she realized what she was seeing. What is this?" she stammered, her voice shaky now, no longer so sure of herself. I didn't answer. I just watched as her face drained of color, as the reality of her situation slowly dawned on her. The footage rolled on, showing her and Jason entering a hotel room together, the timestamp in the corner confirming everything I already knew. The lies, the cheating, the betrayal, it was all right there, undeniable. "Ethan, I can explain," she started, but I cut her off. "Explain what?" I asked, my voice cold, the anger I had been holding back for so long finally seeping through. "Explain how you've been lying to me for months. How you've been sneaking around behind my back with him." I jabbed my finger at the screen, where Jason Turner's smug face stared back at us. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She was cornered, and she knew it. The footage continued, transitioning to another clip, this time of her at the villa party. I had cameras installed everywhere that night, and now, she was watching herself, half naked, surrounded by men, drinking and laughing without a care in the world. The very moment that had destroyed me was now playing out in front of her, and there was no way for her to deny it. I watched as her hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. She knew there was no talking her way out of this. Every lie she had told me, every excuse, was laid bare in front of her. Her world was collapsing right before her eyes, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. "You've been playing me for a fool this entire time," I said, my voice steady but filled with the anger I had been holding onto for so long. "You thought you could get away with it, didn't you? That I'd just sit here, clueless, while you went off and did whatever the hell you wanted." "Ethan, please, it's not what it looks like," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "Not what it looks like?" I barked out a laugh, cold and humorless. "It's exactly what it looks like, Madison. You've been cheating on me, lying to my face, acting like you're innocent while you sneak around with multiple men. And you thought I wouldn't find out?" She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks now, but I wasn't moved. Not anymore. This wasn't the woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted. This was someone else entirely, someone who had been using me, playing me for a fool, and enjoying every second of it. "I don't care what excuses you come up with," I continued, stepping closer to her. "You've betrayed me, and there's no going back from this." She sobbed, her hands shaking as she tried to reach out for me. "Please, Ethan, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. It was a mistake. I was confused." "Confused?" I repeated, my voice laced with disbelief. "You call screwing around with half a dozen men confusion? You weren't confused, Madison. You were selfish. You wanted everything, my money, my lifestyle, and the freedom to do whatever you wanted without consequences." I stepped back, letting the silence hang in the air as the last of the footage played out. The room felt heavy with tension, her sobs the only sound breaking the quiet. But I wasn't done. "You see, Madison, this isn't just about us anymore," I said, my voice low but steady. "I made sure every one of your little lovers will pay for what they did. Starting with Jason Turner." Her eyes widened, and I could see the panic setting in. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've already taken care of it," I said, a smirk playing on my lips. "Jason's career is over. I've got enough dirt on him to bury him professionally and personally. He'll lose everything, his fiancée, his business, his reputation. And it's all because of you." Her face crumpled as the weight of my words sank in. She knew I wasn't bluffing. She knew that this was only the beginning of her downfall. "And you?" I said, my tone sharp and final. "You're done too. Our marriage is over. You'll get nothing from me." No alimony, no settlement. I've already had the divorce papers drawn up. All you have to do is sign. Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't care. I had waited for this moment, and now that it was here, all I felt was cold satisfaction. You made your choices, Madison, I said, turning away from her. Now, you'll have to live with them. I walked out of the room, leaving her to cry alone, knowing that this was just the start of her misery. It's been a week since I unleashed my revenge, and in that time, everything has played out exactly the way I planned. Madison's world has crumbled, and for the first time in months, I feel like I'm finally in control of my own life again. Watching her fall apart has been satisfying, to say the least. But as the dust settles, I'm left with something I didn't expect, a strange sense of emptiness. After that night in the living room, Madison tried everything she could to change the inevitable. She sobbed, she begged, she tried to apologize, but I wasn't hearing it. The trust was gone, and with it, any remnants of the love I once had for her. I made her sign the divorce papers the next morning. She didn't have a choice, I made sure she'd be left with nothing. No house, no money, just the bitter taste of her own betrayal. The media picked up on the story soon after, thanks to some well-placed leaks. Pictures, videos, the whole sordid affair spread like wildfire across social media. Madison's reputation, once carefully crafted to show her as the beautiful, glamorous wife of a successful businessman, was in tatters. The public humiliation was exactly what she deserved. I made sure that everywhere she went, she'd be reminded of what she did. People would recognize her, whisper about her, judge her. She would never escape it. And the men? They didn't fare much better. Jason Turner, my biggest rival, lost everything. His fiancée dumped him after seeing the footage I provided. She didn't just break the engagement, she publicly denounced him, took her investments out of his business, and let the world know what kind of man he really was. His company started to unravel soon after. Clients pulled out of deals, investors jumped ship, and Jason's once thriving business empire began to collapse under the weight of scandal. The other men involved? I made sure each of them was exposed. For the married ones, their wives received anonymous packages filled with proof of their infidelity, pictures, texts, receipts from expensive gifts they had given Madison. Divorces were filed, homes were broken, and alimony payments were set in motion. One by one, they all fell, just like I planned. But what surprised me the most was how quickly Madison's so-called friends abandoned her. The same people who had partied with her, laughed with her, encouraged her reckless behavior, were nowhere to be found when she needed them. They didn't want to be associated with the scandal. They distanced themselves, leaving her completely alone to face the consequences. I guess loyalty only goes so far when your social life is built on lies and appearances. After everything came crashing down, Madison had no choice but to leave. I told her to pack her things and get out of the house. She cried, pleaded for me to give her another chance, but I couldn't even look at her. The woman I had loved was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize, someone I didn't want to recognize. I watched as she packed up her belongings, the weight of her mistakes heavy on her shoulders, and I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. She was getting exactly what she deserved. The last time I saw her, she was standing in the driveway with her suitcases, looking at me one last time, hoping for some kind of forgiveness. But I had none to give. I turned my back on her, and with that, she was gone. And now, here I am. The house feels emptier, quieter. For so long, my life had been consumed by her lies, by the anger and the need for revenge. I spent months plotting, planning, tearing her world apart, and now that it's over, I'm left with this strange sense of finality. Like I've completed a mission, but I don't know what comes next. I thought that once I destroyed her, I'd feel free. And in some ways, I do. There's no more weight on my chest, no more sick feeling in my stomach when I think about what she did. But there's also this hollowness. I guess that's the thing about revenge, it doesn't fix everything. It doesn't take away the betrayal or the pain. It just balances the scales. I can't help but look back and wonder how I let things get so far. How I fell for someone like Madison, how I ignored the signs, how I convinced myself that love could change her. I've learned the hard way that love isn't always enough. Some people are just selfish. They'll take whatever you give them and never think twice about how much they're hurting you. That's what Madison did. She took everything, and in the end, she gave nothing back. But I won't let it happen again. I've learned my lesson, and I won't be that blind, trusting fool anymore. The next time I let someone into my life, I'll be smarter. I'll look for the warning signs, and I won't ignore them. If there even is a next time. I've made a decision, I'm moving on. It's time to focus on me, on rebuilding my life the way I want it. No more lies, no more games. I've cleared the slate, and now it's time to see what I can build from the wreckage. As for Madison, I don't know where she is now, and I don't care. She's out of my life for good, and that's all that matters. I hope she thinks about what she lost every single day. I hope the emptiness she feels is worse than mine. Because she didn't just lose me, she lost the life she could have had, the respect, the love. She threw it all away for cheap thrills, and now she has nothing. Revenge might not fix everything, but it sure as hell sends a message.